every fantastic video game franchise, there's always the rookie first entry of the series that had to give its player base a hard sell in order to be considered successful. We had Resident Evil on PlayStation 1, which stumped players at the time with its cryptic gameplay and horrifying imagery, memorable boss battles and corny dialogue, amongst other factors. Point is, we had many other great examples of survival horror done right in the United States, so there was no shortage of interest in the genre here. It wasn't until I turned about 17 that I bought and played Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl for the very first time ever. Being a console gamer my entire life, I hadn't yet known that one of the most fantastic and ambitious shooters ever made was being played by most of the PC community. I got all three of the main games during an insanely cheap sale just a few years ago, and I felt it was time to finally dive into them. Much like Zomboid, I was unfair to the Stalker series with my first impressions. I hated how hard it was, and I didn't like the intense, complex mechanics that are always in effect. Though I wouldn't say Shadow of Chernobyl is as complicated as Anomaly, and I can't really hate a game just because it's too hard. That's like hating somebody because they have a nicer car than I do. Stalker's main calling card was that it didn't hold your hand. It just held your wrists, tied them behind your back, and punched you in the fucking ribs until they snapped. It's a series that idolizes being a realistic, hardcore experience, even on the easiest difficulty. In most modern shooters that I grew up with, the main character had to refill their health by avoiding damage for a short amount of time. The developers of Stalker would laugh at the very idea of that happening in their games. In a brutal world full of threats that surprise you in every corner, Shadow of Chernobyl was the first entry of the games, and the first one I ever played. We're gonna kick off this marathon with the player taking control of the Marked One, as he navigated the zone for the first time in search of its deepest, darkest secrets. If you've seen my Anomaly videos, you already know a majority of the factions that make up Stalker's world. The game begins with an intimidating cutscene that enthralls the player, giving them mere glimpses of uncomfortable imagery and an introduction for our lead character. I'm not going to go over the entire storyline of each game here, but I will make sure I cover most of the important points as much as possible. I was just really eager to get this first entry of the marathon out, so please excuse the shoddy editing and annoying voiceovers. Anyway, the game begins with an opening cinematic. A truck is carrying dead bodies to an unknown location when it's knocked off the road and demolished by an electric anomaly. Another stalker wanders into the wreckage the next day, only to find a man who is still alive among the crash. With a tattoo on his arm that spells Stalker, he is hereby known as the Marked One, and that's usually what everyone refers to him as in this first game. There's a PDA on him that reads, "Kill the Strelok." No further context is given. Thanks to 𝚎𝙧𝙧, the starting trader of the game, you have to repay the debt you owe him for saving your life. So right off the bat, one of our first missions is to get our hands dirty and fight some hostile stalkers and mutants. Though it might feel somewhat dated by today's standards, I find it hard to complain about the direct combat in Shadow of Chernobyl. You'd think that in such an extreme game like this, the combat would be best avoided. I'm here to tell you there's nothing more fun than gunning down a group of hostile bandits, stealing their supplies, and getting away safely. The mutants are another thing entirely. You can search them after you kill them, but they don't really have remains to collect most of the time. The game doesn't give us much, and that's done on purpose. You have the weakest handgun and the lightest armor available at the start, and you'll get your shit rocked because of it. Your first enemies of the game will mostly consist of small-tier mutants like boars, blind dogs, and armed bandits that pillage their way through a broken zone. Though these threats are common, they are almost always serious. Enemies in this game are trained to kill despite whatever the circumstance. Their accuracy is absolutely wild, and the impressive AI for its time surpasses even Anomaly today. Hostiles don't come after you one by one, but instead will work together to flank, suppress, and kill you in tactical shooter fashion, sometimes spreading their numbers thin for a better view of their target. If you're careful and manage to kill a stalker wielding a primary weapon, I highly recommend you steal it and get the fuck out of there. There will be plenty of chances to find ammo for the gun, and you never know if someone else is in the area. I made the mistake of pissing off the military pretty early on, which is another hostile faction that you'll have to face every now and again. The Spetsnaz military regime in Pripyat is one of extreme status in the zone. The military have advanced gear, weapons, and vehicles like helicopters. It's no surprise any typical stalker would get a bit nervous trying to confront these guys. They control a lot of major areas of the cordon, making navigation a bit difficult, but not impossible. The game gives you various options for playing it, such as the choice of fighting the armed goons for 10 to 20 minutes and risking losing all your ammo and best gear, or you could skip all that shit and walk through an anomalous tunnel. For the time the game was released, I'm actually surprised with how many details it has. Your choices slightly matter in how the story works. I met up with a stalker who had sensitive information on the man I'm hunting. He was injured after fighting some dogs. I didn't have a medkit to save him, so he died. I was then instructed to find someone entirely different to ask about Strelok, which I thought was a neat detail. Even in most AAA modern titles, they don't provide the same attention and care. I really did expect this guy to die and I would just have to restart my game. But no, they thought ahead. It might not be the most violent and brutal bloodbath depiction of warfare, but I'd like to think it works in its simplicity. It doesn't need intense blood decals or gore, it just needs to be fun to play, and thankfully it is. Let's talk about the map. The concept of traveling between subsectors of a world is intriguing to me and allows for the use of non-intrusive loading screens. You see that shit? I just blinked and the game is already loaded. Each and every subsector of the game is interesting with its own landscape, value, feel, and population. I can imagine, for many people, that this was a jaw-dropping first-hand experience. Like I said before, it is anything but easy. When you find yourself entangled in a firefight, the best course of action is to take cover and be alert, focusing on planting your shots accordingly instead of spraying and praying like a caveman. Depending on the gun's overall condition, it'll either perform better or worse. A well-taken care of firearm works wonders in any situation, whereas the slightest amount of dirt and rust can adhere the benefits to self-defense in this game. Your bullets don't always go straight, and your character feels very much unprepared for the starting quests. Get used to it. Stalker's realistic gameplay is here to stay, and it remains a consistent theme the further along you make it. The best way to play the game without getting too frustrated is to search stashes for extra loot and some goods. Yeah, Jesus, about time I talked about these, it's only the fucking staple of the game. Stashes serve as extra supplies stored by another stalker long ago who either died or forgot about its position. Now, the stashes remain scattered in the zone for anyone to pick through them, so if you spend a lot of time gathering these stashes, you'll find great things you can use. Meds, valuables, artifacts, ammunition, all that junk. You're dirt poor in the beginning of this game as well, which means you will be doing constant errand boy work. In my opinion though, this was a really impressive game at the time, and the errand stuff doesn't ever feel like a burden to the player like it does in other games. Hard work does pay off, and once a mission is completed, the corresponding character will reward you. Ugh, the inventory management in this game is bunk. At the start, you're only allowed to carry up to 50 pounds. Sounds like a lot of fucking weight, but the problem is that everything has weight to it in this game. Pick up too much and you'll be encumbered to the point where you can't move and your stamina will drain immensely. I know what you're thinking. In real life, this sounds plausible. You can't carry the entire world on your fucking shoulders after all, and we as humans are limited on inventory in the clothing department. I recommend you just sell the ammo, drinks, and food that you either don't want or can't carry. It sounds like shit when I put it that way, but it's better than suffering later on. Keep an eye on that inventory screen, try to sell any items or artifacts that you don't need, and utilize the current economy to your advantage. You'll need plenty of rubles because everything is expensive as fuck. Look at that, a brand new suit, just teasing me by being in Sidorovich's inventory, but guess what? It's 60,000 rubles. Holy shit! In Stalker Anomaly, that's chump change and easily attainable through side quests, which is a much more forgiving challenge to newbie players of the series. Thankfully, the original games continue to hold the torch with their respective difficulty levels and the challenges associated with them. Some stashes or locations contain a suit that has specific attributes aiding the player in an unfair fight. I found a suit early on that allowed my stamina to replenish at a much faster rate than before, and what do you know? My movement has increased tenfold in times of crisis. This is the same case for special weaponry as well, like when you go to the Agriprom Underground for the very first time. Here, you have to find Strelok's secret hideout. For the first time, we can see in this dark, decrepit, spooky area that there are bandits, bloodsuckers, and bastards from the military roaming around. It makes for a really intense gameplay experience. Once you find the hidden room, you can collect expensive military documents. These will help you get into another area of the game later on. Within the hideout, be sure to look around carefully. There's a couple of grenades and ammo in the metal boxes with a fast-firing AK-47 on the shelf nearby. With an improved firing rate, it can easily devastate even the toughest of foes from a medium-range distance. Yeah, you really gotta land your shots in this game. Most enemies are really strong and require the quickest yet most disciplined reactions ever. Stealth in this game is pretty bad, and I wouldn't ever recommend trying it, considering enemies will just sense that you're near them if you get too close. My advice is, aim for the head. A lot easier said than done, I know, but a lot of stalkers wear really tough armor that isn't going to be penetrated by any of the ammo you find in the early game. Iron sights are the best bet, even though your bullets will probably go anywhere but straight. There have been many times where I mag dumped a soldier in the chest and he proceeded to kill me, so now I aim for their fucking faces. The zone isn't as punishing and grueling as I'm making it out to be. It's even worse. However, there are some benefits to exploring the environment and engaging with hostile stalkers on your journey across the radiated wasteland. You have a high chance of discovering the location of a stash whenever you loot the body of a dead enemy, which can very much lead to some great discoveries. Anti-radiation drugs are the recommended medication for radiation sickness, but you'll actually fare better if you collect bottles of vodka and drink them. They help prevent further sickness as well as rid your body of any current toxins. I wouldn't recommend trying to fight someone while inebriated though. Collecting artifacts is useful for both economic and personal reasons. Gathering these strange objects can net you a decent fortune in the zone, which you'll need in order to purchase better gear and weaponry. You can also use certain artifacts to upgrade your own skills, such as Stone Blood, which increases your health, or certain ones that increase your endurance and stuff. It's not just the combat that makes the gameplay so intense. You'll find yourself having to wander through anomalous thermite fields, electric anomalies, crushers, and many more environmental hazards that are basically a calling card of the Stalker series today. Call it a cheap obstacle to throw at the player if you want, but the anomalies serve as nothing more than a reminder not to fall asleep at the keyboard. Otherwise, the game itself will shock you awake and get you focused all over again. Like Chinese water torture. There are a few suits you can get early on that provide more than enough protection for you against both ballistic and supernatural forces. The mercenary suit is a good start, but a step above that usually requires visiting a trader and saving up your rubles. And it's normally not worth it. Unlike Anomaly, the main games make the economy as scarce as possible. There's no way of looting corpses or stashes for money. Instead, you earn an income by completing missions. It's a bummer that it takes so much effort to afford the good gear that most traders sell, but I'd like to think this is to encourage exploration. If you're lucky enough, you can find a stash with a better suit in no time, and this really goes for all of the Stalker games, but it's emphasized more in the first. Another thing, I'm kinda sick of this whole mistreatment of Stalker's original graphics design. Lots of people complain about the gray, depressing, monotone color all throughout the course of the games. Well, you can't really expect the world to look like sunshine and fucking rainbows after a nuclear disaster that devastated everyone and everything still left standing in Pripyat.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
I have never minded how Stalker looks, because the game doesn't need to be in 4K or have upscaled textures or all these different fucking color combinations to be visually fun and appealing. The gameplay, in my opinion, makes up for the more bland-ish visuals you'll come across in Shadow of Chernobyl, and all of the other games as well. The sound design is alright, but it's a little wonky. Character voices can be heard clear as day, while the footsteps of those around you are more silent than a mouse on its tippy toes. Guns sound okay too, but I find lots of them to be lacking in performance. It makes sense that in the beginning, we're not going to get the toughest guns, not even close. But when you do eventually find a nice one, it then becomes a battle of luck. Sometimes your accuracy is great, other times it isn't. This can all depend on many factors such as your health, hunger, thirst, stamina, weapon condition, so on and so forth. For a game made so long ago, I am really happy it holds up intensely well. I find a lot of joy investing time into it and replaying the story for the sake of remembering a monumental start to the franchise we now know and love. It might not be the goriest game, nor does it have the fanciest visuals, but it is just as relevant today as it was back then. I feel like each and every first-person veteran should have this under their plate by now. I remember being mystified by the complex ending choices and the various ways that your main character can meet an untimely fate. This was the first game to introduce the Wish Granter, and thanks to its menacing otherworldly power, it has the ability to grant the wish of anybody that it lures into its gaze, at the cost of something fatal. You can wish for all the riches of the zone, then witness your character during a hallucination where rubles rain from the heavens above. As it turns out, the falling rubles are actually pieces of debris from the building's collapsed roof. If you wish for the zone to disappear, you'll wake up in a field with seemingly no dangers left from the zone's awakening. Unfortunately, it's another trick. the player will turn blind, indicating they have become a zombie and can no longer traverse the zone rationally. So, in a way, the zone did disappear. I find this one to be the most disturbing in my opinion. The other two choices are creepy, but I feel they could have been done a little bit better. Even though it's one of the harder ones in the series, Shadow of Chernobyl is by far the most classic. With a rough yet enjoyable experience the longer you play, it's no wonder that people are still big fans of it. I mean, we really wouldn't have Stalker Anomaly if the first game never came to be, nor others that were clearly inspired by its massive appeal, like the Metro series. Nowadays, Stalker is a franchise. So let's continue down the line of some of the other games in the series that I'll be covering in a little mini marathon. Join me again for part 2 when I discuss the greatness behind Call of Pripyat and how effective it was at giving me a much improved experience than the last one. Thanks for watching part 1. I'll see you guys in part 2.